Hi, everyone, and welcome to Maryland LCV's Friday Digest series, where we shed some light on the issues moving through Annapolis and share ways you can engage. I'm Rebecca Rear, Director of Climate Policy and Justice for Maryland LCV, excited to welcome you today to talk about clean energy. As always, your presence here speaks to the power of our community and to your commitment to the environmental causes that affect us all. Our goal with Friday Digest is to provide you with information, tools, and resources to be an informed and active advocate. We also want the agenda for these virtual meetings to be driven by your interests and needs, so please let us know what you want to hear. The easiest way to provide this information is to fill out the survey you will receive at the end of the session. As you join, please type your name into the chat and tell us where you're joining from. And as we move through the half hour we have together today, please type your questions and comments in the Q&A or the chat box, and we'll get to as many as we can to help shape today's conversation. Today, we kick off a 4-part series on Maryland LCV's priority legislation. Today, we'll be discussing the Abundant Affordable Clean Energy Act, or the AACE Act. I'm joined by the bill sponsor in the House and my delegate, Delegate Lorig Charkoudian, who represents District 20 and sits on the Economic Matters Committee. Welcome, Delegate Charkoudian.
Thanks for having me.
I'm also joined by Rico Albacarys, Political Director for IBEW Local 24. Welcome, Rico.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Our discussion will focus on key aspects of the AACE Act to meet growing energy demand with investments in non-carbon emitting energy generation in the state of Maryland while adding ratepayer protections and labor provisions and shoring up a reliable grid. We're first going to hear an overview of the bill from Delegate Charkoudian before getting into some dialogue, followed by Q&A with all of you. So get those questions in the chat box. Delegate Charkoudian, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks for having me. We got some slides. Are we able to put those up? Great. Thanks. So welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us. As you probably are aware, there's a lot of conversation right now about a number of things related to energy. And so one of the issues that we're facing is significant increases in people's energy bills. And that is as a result of a number of factors. A big piece of it is PJM's failure to allow new energy to move quickly enough to get onto the grid. They're PJM's queue issues. Some of it has to do with PJM changing their rules. Some of it has to do with reliability must run and payments to keep coal plants on for longer than they should. So a host of these issues are leading to higher energy rates. And so a lot of concern right now in Annapolis about the price of energy. Simultaneously, there's concern about the increase in expected energy use that's coming from primarily data centers and other increased manufacturing, but also to some extent, a much more modest extent, electrification of buildings and transportation. And so when we're facing issues of increased load and increased prices, folks, there's a temptation to panic, and there's proposals around to do things like build new gas plants, which I believe from the work that we've been doing over the last year, we can address all of these issues, the affordability issues, the reliability issues, the load growth issues with clean energy. And that's really what this bill, and do it in a way that protects ratepayers. And so that's really what this bill seeks to do. Next slide, please. Can we get to, yeah, there we go. Okay, so there's a couple of ways that it does it, and it's a little bit, so one of the things that we do is we change the way, right now we have a renewable energy portfolio standard with renewable energy credits, and those credits are capped with what's called the alternative compliance payment. And one of the things that's happened is we have had these systems in place and they haven't really worked to build new solar to the pace that we need it in the state. And they also haven't worked to generate a lot of new wind, which we can't do as much wind in the state, but we could do more than what we're doing. And so a lot of these credits end up going out of state, and or we end up paying an alternative payment instead of actually buying the credits and building the new clean energy. And so this bill changes the way that we do solar renewable energy credits and wind renewable energy credits for the state to really drive more of that investment in building clean energy in Maryland, and also to make sure that ratepayer money is going just to build clean energy. And if it's not going there, then it doesn't get collected. And that's a really important ratepayer protection piece. Next slide, please. The second thing that it does is, all of the projections that we have, there's debate about whether we need new nuclear or not, and I'm not going to go into that debate now, but all of the analysis that I've seen suggests that we need to make sure that Calvert Cliffs does get relicensed as a source of carbon-free electricity. We need to make sure it gets relicensed in 32 and 34. And so this bill does not make it part of a renewable energy portfolio. It does not move RECs towards it, but it does create a price support that essentially mirrors the production tax credit in the IRA. So right now, the IRA production tax credit ensures some funds to go towards existing nuclear, but only if their revenue goes below a certain amount. So they don't get any money unless sort of it's needed to sort of meet a certain price point. And so the way the bill is written is only if the production tax credit at the federal level goes away, then Maryland would have this price protection in place, but this price protection would only have funds going to Calvert Cliffs if their revenue dropped below a certain level. So that creates enough stability for them to relicense, and we expect them then to be there for the next several decades. Next slide, please. One of the most significant things that the bill does is that in addition to bringing on a lot of new clean solar and wind, is a significant investment in storage. And the reason storage is important is because it is a no regrets path forward. So in the short term, it balances our load with the resources that we have on the grid, which includes gas. But unlike building new gas, storage then, as we build more and more renewables, is flexible and becomes the thing that allows the renewables based grid to balance in the future once we have those increased renewables on. So storage will both balance our load now, it'll let us meet the load now, but also it'll be really important as the foundation on which we can get closer and closer to 100% clean energy point in the future. Next slide, please. So then as we're looking at the various ways that all of this gets paid for, as I mentioned, it changes the structures that we currently use to make sure that any ratepayer money that is collected for clean energy is going towards building clean energy and goes back to ratepayers if the clean energy isn't getting built, unlike our structure right now. But the second thing that it does that protects ratepayers is one of the things we know is that the increase in primarily data centers in Maryland, but potentially other heavy energy users, is leading to this rapid need for sort of rapid growth in our load. And so rather than only having ratepayers sort of pay it across the board with rates, we're taking funds that come from the data centers, energy and use franchise, anyway, it's the energy tax, the tax they pay on the energy usage. So it goes up and down based on how much energy they're using. And we dedicate 75% of that to offset the cost of building all of these renewables and storage, offset it from ratepayers having to pay it. It's just a really significant piece of how we protect ratepayers in this bill. Next slide, please. And then, as is important, if anyone has ever met me, you know that every single clean energy bill that I put in has labor standards. And I think Rico may speak a little bit more to this, but I just want to talk a little bit about a clean energy transition. I think given the fact that there has been a 50-year fight against labor and working people in courts and in Congress and in all kinds of other places, such that most of the industries that are being developed now, new industries that are developed now, tend to not be high road sort of labor standard industries. They tend to be race to the bottom industries. And so if we want to make sure that our future economy and our future clean energy industries are high road industries, are industries that create a path to the middle class, we have to put into every single clean energy bill we write labor standards that ensures that we're part of raising the bar and building middle class with our clean energy future, as opposed to being part of a race to the bottom sort of an economy that we find ourselves in right now. I think that's it. Is there another slide?
I
That's
do
it.
think that's it.
Okay.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thanks so much. We did get
Thank
one
you.
clarifying question while you were presenting, which is about whether nuclear is actually in Maryland's renewable portfolio or Maryland's energy portfolio standard now. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
No, it's not.
Yep.
And it's just to be clear, this bill doesn't put it in a portfolio. It just creates this price support if it's needed and if the federal tax credit goes away.
Great. Thank you. And thanks. I think your overview gives people a good sense of what's in the bill and really what we're trying to accomplish. And Rico and IBEW and Maryland LCV are part of a robust coalition supporting this bill, including not only environmentalists and labor, but also industry groups, ratepayer advocates, and faith-based groups. So Rico, can you talk a little bit about why, and this is a good segue from the end of the delegate's presentation, but can you talk a little bit about why IBEW is supporting the AACE Act?
Sure, thank you. And thank you, Delegate Charkoudian. One of the things that we're really interested about the AACE Act is that incentivizes to build things in Maryland. And so as an electrician, as a tradesperson, myself and all of my members, we need to build things. We need to build, industry. We very much want to build data centers. We also would love to build solar generation. We would like to build offshore wind. We want to build things in Maryland, and this bill really helps to incentivize that. And then, like the delegate touched on, everything that she does and everything that we've been a part of with her has really good labor standards in it. I'm particularly interested in the battery storage component and the labor standards that are there. And as we do transition away from some of the older fossil fuel energy generation, it is important to have labor standards in these new industries. And so we're really supportive of the bill for those reasons.
Great. Thank you so much. I have a couple questions for you before we get to the audience Q&A. And the first question is, we've talked about this bill and you all heard about it in the presentation as a no regrets approach to a clean energy future. So what does that mean for each of you? What does it mean to take a no regrets approach, and how does this bill reflect that, a no regrets approach? Like, what does it mean when we say that?
Yeah,
Delegate, why don't you go first? Yeah.
So actually, I mean, it's a great way to live our lives, right? No regrets. But it's like our little hashtag. We should add that as a hashtag for the AACE Act. But it is actually a no regrets approach is actually technically, it is a technical concept in utility industry and rate making and all of that kind of thing. And what it means is, like, at this point, what it means for this bill is, at this point in time, there's a lot of speculation about load growth. There's a lot of speculation about retirements. There's a lot of speculation about what we might need to meet that load growth. And as I said, there's people who are advocating for, we need to build new gas plants. We need to have the utilities rate-based new gas plants, which actually is the absolute worst thing you could do for ratepayers. If you're worried about ratepayers, having utilities rate-based new gas plants is the worst thing we could do. And what I have said is, I have not yet seen an analysis that concludes that we need to build new gas plants. So it could be out there, we could get there, but I haven't seen that yet. And so at this point in time, investing in battery storage, because of its flexibility, allows us to take the gas plants that we have online right now, frankly, and in the very short term, before we have enough renewables, we're using the electrons from whatever plants we have online now, gas, nuclear, the renewables that we have, but it's a very small amount. But that very same investment into battery storage, as we get more and more renewables on, shifts to becoming a system that supports renewables. Whereas if you build a gas plant, it can only ever be a gas plant, right? And so that idea of no regrets is, we can take this path now. We know it's going to be valuable in the immediate term and in the long term. And it also buys us time. So if we get to a point that there's some analysis that suggests we can't do it with renewables and battery storage, which I don't believe we're going to get there, but some people do, then we still won't have regrets, because battery storage will still be useful, even if there's a conclusion that we also need to build a gas plant, right? So that's the idea behind a no regrets path. And the bill gets the battery storage procurement going immediately, basically, where if we didn't move this bill, all of the procedures that are in place wouldn't have the battery storage procurement start for like another 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, Rico, anything to add?
I don't think I could have anything to add to that. Just echo what the delegate said, that no matter what you think the energy solutions will be in the medium term, battery storage is good in the short term and will be useful in the medium term, and quite possibly in the long term, we will need them as well. So the no regrets approach, why would we not try to get battery storage online as quickly as possible? Because we're going to need it regardless.
Thanks. And switching gears a little bit, I'm curious, Delegate Charkoudian, what's some of the most compelling testimony you've heard in committee? I think we have folks on the line who are going to make their voices heard on the ACE Act, and who are involved in getting bills through the legislature. And you sit in committee hearings for much of session. And so how can people get their message on clean energy across, especially when legislators are having to grapple with so many issues each session?
Yeah. Well, I think right now, I think that fossil fuel interests and the unfortunate sort of kind of place that we're at with the partisanship and ideologically based anti-renewables, sort of all of that kind of energy that's out there. There is this false narrative that you have to pick between, do we protect ratepayers, keep prices low, or do we address our climate goals? And I don't believe in false choices like, I don't believe that we have to make that choice. And I believe that if we get our policies right, so it's not inherent that everything that's good for the environment is also good for ratepayers, but it's not hard to get our policies right so that we are, with clean energy, protecting ratepayers. And that is what this bill does. And so I think really making sure we're not buying into that myth, and we're saying, if you want to protect ratepayers, the best thing we can do right now really is to move forward the elements that are in the ACE Act, is to invest in things that are always going to be needed by ratepayers. Our energy system is always going to need battery storage. Whereas if we invest in a gas plant with an expectation that in 10 or 15 years, it could be retired once we finally get wind or whatever else on, that's a very bad deal for ratepayers, right? And so I think really remembering that right now, the significant concern in the state, and legitimately, like real, we need to be very concerned about ratepayers. People can't keep their lights on. And if we really are serious about protecting them, we don't go with some ideological lie about then we got to build fossil fuel plants. We go with a plan and a process that lays out a path forward that protects ratepayers first and foremost, and does it with clean energy. And so we can keep going on our path towards our climate goals.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I spend a lot of time sitting in those committee rooms. And I think when people come and share their personal story to bring that all to light, it really makes a difference. I've said this a few times, but I'm in Annapolis a lot. Maryland LCV has a pretty big presence in Annapolis. People expect to see us there. We like to think our voice really matters, and we're there to be honest brokers of information. But people expect to see us there. And so for all of you listening, it really means a lot on the ACE Act and other issues making their way through the legislative session that you weigh in, that you tell your story, and that you support this, because it's your voices that really make the difference. And so I would just encourage all of you. We're going to put some resources in the chat. We have fact sheets available online. We just launched our action alert in time for this episode. So you'll see some links in the chat where you can use the action alert to start to let your legislators know how important this issue is, to balance that need for clean energy, clean air, and clean water with ratepayer interests. So check that out. And make sure you join us, for example, on our lobby night, February 17th, to tell those stories and to support this bill among Maryland LCV's priorities. So Rico, I actually wanted to ask you a little bit about the power of partnership. Have you seen, can you talk a little bit about how you've seen labor groups and environmentalists work together for positive change?
Yeah, sure. I know a lot of folks, maybe folks on this call, imagine that people in the construction industry and people in the environmental community are natural enemies, and that's simply not the case. We do need to build things, and sometimes we run up against each other in those ways. But I think folks at LCV, you, Rebecca, Kristen Harbison, and especially Delegate Charkoudian have done a fantastic job of bridging those communities and showing that where there is common ground, we should work together, and it does create a more powerful coalition and a more powerful message. We're also trying to protect the same people, right? So we're worried about economic justice, and people in the environmental community are worried about environmental justice. Well, typically it's the same folks that are being impacted by both of those things. And in the past, we worked on the Power Act together. We worked on the Warmth Act with a large coalition. Both of those things have environmental interests, but have really, really good labor standards. Both happen to be sponsored by Delegate Charkoudian, so maybe there's a common thread there. But it's been eye-opening for me, and has been helpful for me to explain the issues to my members with more nuance, and really understand a bigger picture of what we're dealing with.
And I'm actually really glad you brought up the Power Act. Also, Power, Warmth, ACE, all great acronyms. But the Power Act, we're getting some good questions in the chat actually about the change in the federal administration and some of the executive orders that we've seen come out, and questions in particular about the impact on wind, offshore wind in Maryland. And the Power Act was the bill that we worked on. And Rico, it might have been when you and I first worked together on the Power Act to have our state goal on offshore wind and make sure we had plan in place to reach there. So I just want to ask either of you to comment on the Trump administration's executive orders and what that means for the future of the offshore wind industry in Maryland.
So obviously we're, devastated to have, we went from having an extraordinary partner in the White House and in Washington to having someone who's sort of actively fighting in every way they can, sort of our clean energy future. But having said that, so I think, everything becomes harder. But that just means we work harder, and we just work harder, and we just leave it all in the field as we always do. So kind of big picture, that's what we're going to do. We're not going to stop. And I think I would say that because with offshore wind, there's it's not clear yet what's going to happen, and there'll be lawsuits, and there'll be back and forth, and things will, so in general, my suggestion as we reel from and are heartbroken and devastated by everything coming out of Washington right now, it's important not to panic and kind of get clear on these are the things we can do. Here's how we keep moving forward right now. Here's how we do everything we can in the state right now to protect our neighbors, to protect our environment, to protect our workers, to protect labor standards. But on the Power Act in particular, part of what the act did is it set a number of things in motion for not only the immediate term, but also medium and long term. And so, for example, the transmission planning that the Power Act does really sets us up to be building wind in 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, and doing that really efficiently. And so even if we get slowed down because of permitting, and it's not clear yet whether that's going to happen or not, we have to see how things play out. But even if we get slowed down in terms of permitting, the work that we continue to do on the transmission planning is going to be crucial and can continue to move us forward so that when we get streamlined permitting again and all of those kinds of things, the transmission work is done, and we're ready to go with starting to build stuff. And so I just would highlight that's one of just many examples we could talk about of where even when we're up against sort of some challenges in federal processes, we can continue to move things forward in Maryland.
Yeah, Rico, any comment on the
Yeah, I agree with the delegate, and I just think it's important not to lose sight of long-term goals, and where do you think the state and to be honest, where do you think the country will be 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now? I think the offshore wind industry is here in America to stay. It's not quite here in Maryland yet, but it's certainly building capacity here in Maryland, and I believe that 20 years from now, we're going to be getting power from off of our coast through offshore wind turbines. And so how can we continue to move the ball forward in small ways and in big ways? Obviously, the Power Act is a really important component.
Yeah, and Thank you both. And I think also in terms of Maryland, we're really grateful to be living in Maryland at this time because we have an administration committed to our climate goals, to achieving our climate goals. And it's my understanding that we have a few companies active in Maryland who have procured lease areas already. And for one in particular, US Winds Project has actually received all of its federal permits. And so should be, we anticipate it to continue to move forward because it had already received all of its federal permits by the end of last year. So it's just to add a note on progress and forward momentum there. So we did get we got another question about some of the ratepayer protections in the bill and about I think everyone has heard about and is anxious about the rate increases that everyone's going to expect over the summer, the announcements that have been made about rate increases over the summer. And so there's a clarification question, sort of, it's a little bit in two parts. Can you, does this bill do anything about that? I mean, I don't, just sort of clarifying that point. And then how, with the increases in rates and demand with data centers coming online in particular, the question says, how does this bill protect against increases in rates that people expect if data centers come online? So Delegate Charkoudian, over to you.
Yeah, so the bill won't be in effect by July of next year. So it's not going to change those rates.
Yep.
I think the elements of the bill, including the sort of recycling of alternative compliance payments, for lack of a better word, well, we like recycling, right? Recycling of the alternative compliance payments can happen like within a year. So that would be something people will see pretty quickly. The changes to how we do procurement kind of take a little bit of time. So you won't, so like, I think the way to think about it is rates will go up in July and would continue to climb over the next several years unless we put this into place. And this will sort of dampen those impacts. This on data centers in particular, data centers have potentially a few different impacts on rates. One of the impacts, and this is the one that this bill addresses directly, is if we sort of want to keep growing the percentage of our energy that is clean and we're growing the amount of energy that we're using, then it costs more to keep growing the percentage of the energy that's clean. And so that's where the component of the bill that says as data centers are using more and more electricity, their taxes are going into this fund that offsets what it costs us to build more and more clean energy. So over time, that'll kind of mitigate the impact on the clean energy growth. Separate from that, there is going to be impact on transmission and distribution costs. And I would say that's a little more complicated. I see we've got 2 minutes left, so I'm not going to try to talk about that. I'll say this. There's, it gets into like FERC orders of cost allocation. It gets into some PSC orders about allocation within the distribution costs. And I do know that there are some bills this year, I haven't seen them yet, but I know they're coming, that look at something similar to like what Ohio did, that essentially kind of say to data centers, you're going to have to pay upfront for the upgrade cost, because one of the dangers is if we expect a data center, build the upgrades, the data center doesn't get built, then all the other ratepayers are left on the hook for those costs. And so that, I think we'll probably have some debate about those costs and those cost allocations in this upcoming session. But I haven't seen the bills yet, so I can't really kind of point people to what they're going to be.
Thanks for that. In the last minute we have, and I'm going to wrap us up, but Rico, really quickly, what kinds of jobs are going to be created through a bill like this? And are there training programs available that people might be interested in?
Yes, certainly. So we have a fantastic apprenticeship in Baltimore City. It's 2699 West Patapsco Avenue. You can look at jtc24.org, shameless plug. It's all types of construction jobs, right? And so it's jobs for people that don't necessarily, well, the jobs that I'm interested in, people that don't necessarily have a college education, and they can get into these jobs right out of high school, or if they're career changers, you're looking at a really good ability to provide for your family with a middle class income. It's electricians, it's operating engineers, it's laborers, it's iron workers, it's these types of folks, the people that really have built our country and continue to build.
Thank you so much. That went by very quickly. I don't know about you two. I had a bunch of prepared questions that we definitely didn't need because our audience was very engaged. So thank you to all of you who are tuning in. That's all the time we have today. But as a wrap up, just want to thank you all for joining us. To our audience, thank you for joining, your engagement today, your support of our work. If you have questions that weren't answered, you can always send them to us by email and one of our team will get back to you. Before you leave, we have a few upcoming events we'd like to share with you. Next Friday, we'll be hosting our next digest focused on another one of our 4 legislative priorities, the Cherish Our Communities Act, which is a community-driven environmental justice and cumulative impacts bill. And join us for our first lobby day in Annapolis on February 17th. Check out the details in the chat. And also next week, the 2025 Environmental Legislative Summit on January 28th, also in Annapolis. That'll be in person in Annapolis, which will feature both the AACE Act and the Cherish Act. You can look forward to seeing me and Rico there. And make sure you fill out our short 5-question survey, which is in the chat. So thanks again. Lots to do, lots of opportunities to engage. Stay warm, stay active, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks, everybody.